Hello and welcome to Overheard Orlando's 10th episode. Since the new year began, I have really been giving a whole lot of thought to the concept of freedom, particularly with the protests, with the current pandemic. Freedom has been at the forefront of a lot of conversations. So today I asked three fellow Orlandoans what they thought about freedom, and we're going to hear what they have to say. So stay tuned. In a strange way, freedom is a lot like love. Similar to love, the definition of freedom looks very different to different people. The parameters of its existence in the real world is also very different depending on who you ask. So first, we'll be hearing from Chris Brown. He is I want to say English literature professor at Valencia College. If I got that wrong, please don't hesitate to correct me, Chris. Anywho, here's what he had to say.
With the current political climate, there's a tendency right now to ask big questions like, what is freedom? Is real freedom possible in the US? What would a truly free country be like? I think these questions are inspired by the very intense and very real oppression Americans have both inherited and experienced. I think it's good to ask big philosophical questions, but only insofar as we complicate those questions and apply them to real people and real oppression, which is the opposite of freedom. Instead of what is freedom, we can ask, who is being oppressed? It's not, is real freedom possible here, but where do we see racism and systemic failure today? I do like the question of what a truly free country would be like, because this land was free once, free from pavement and factories and pollution. For thousands of years, as the Ice Age waned, tribes of Native Americans populated the U.S. successfully without industry and without one language or one culture to control them. This isn't to say that all Native people were free of oppression. There's plenty of evidence to indicate that there were disagreements and war and even slavery between Native tribes. But the consequences of these battles were only felt by those involved and lasted a few generations at most due to the oral transmission of history among Native tribes. The tribes were willing and in fact had to renegotiate their agreements and disagreements every generation. If there wasn't enough land to hunt or farm on, there couldn't be more people. If a tribe lost a dispute, they moved elsewhere. There was plenty of room for winners and losers to go their separate ways, but not anymore. Native America wasn't free from violence or racism, but it was free from the systematic removal of survivability. What I think is truly wrong in our country today has to do with powerlessness, not having the ability to feed and shelter your family, no safe place to live, nothing of value to leave your children and grandchildren. These are freedoms we lost to development, to industry, to military. And those who kept their freedoms through all this have done so by force, by taking and controlling the resources of the planet. What is freedom seems like a question for philosophers and academics, but it's something my ancestors started asking when they felt oppression for the first time. When they were told that the Christian God is the only way forward. When someone said, this is the white man's road. When it became clear that the buffalo doesn't belong to the earth, but to the man who oversees the land through the barrel of his gun. We ask these big questions that perhaps only the earth itself can answer when the earth herself cries out. That's why we're all asking about freedom today. And that's why no one has an easy answer.
Thank you, Chris, for that very well thought out response. 2 points I want to make. First, I'd like to raise the question of, is man in the most basic form a free entity? As Chris pointed out, injustice and loss of freedoms has pervaded many, many years into the past. Is a loss of freedom a byproduct of civilization in any form? Is it the trade-off that we get for stability, for calm? Another point Chris made that I wanted to comment on is the powerlessness that is pretty prevalent in our world today. When you take on a new job, you don't have very much negotiating power in terms of your wages. Even the college educated who can theoretically get into a better career or have more power, quote unquote, over what they do for a living, more often than not are stuck taking whatever job they can get simply to get by. Next, we'll hear from Britney. Britney is a nurse who just recently returned from New York City as she was over there helping with the coronavirus that was ravaging New York. Unfortunately, she won't be an Orlandoan for much longer. She will be going to Tampa. But here's what she had to say.
So I've always had this belief that freedom doesn't really exist, at least not to the extent that this country kind of ingrains into the culture. From the time that we're little, we're told that soldiers fought for our freedom and we have this freedom of speech and we can, say and do as we please. And to some extent we do, right? I mean, we can say certain things and get away with it. I think that, for instance, the things that are being said about Trump on a regular basis in some other countries, if you were to say those things about the president, there would be consequences for it. But where we say things actually matters. For instance, if you are protesting and you decide to do it on private property, you actually don't have the freedom to do that. It's up to the property owner to decide whether or not you have that freedom. And if they choose that they don't want you on their property, they can actually have you arrested for that. In addition to that, I mean, look at how long it took just to be able to have gay and lesbian people be able to marry who they want. And they didn't have the freedom to do that for so long and had to fight so hard for that. Also, if you look at what's happening now in Seattle, they have an area blocked off where they're allowing Black Lives Matter protesters. And if you look at that specific area, for instance, some of those protesters really believe that they have that freedom to be there. But in reality, if you really analyze that, do they really? Because if you look at all throughout the country, I mean, they had the National Guard out and everything. And so maybe they have the freedom in the sense that the mayor has given them that parameter to be able to protest. But if they were to expand outside of that, do you really believe that they would suddenly still have that freedom? I guarantee you the National Guard would be out there. Also, even if you look at our food, for instance, where you have Monsanto that has all these GMO crops, and we're not even being told what foods are GMO or what the consequences of that are, because we've never really done any longitudinal studies for that. But we don't even have the freedom to know what foods are GMO and what we're putting into our bodies. So I'm going to read something that I think really summarizes what it is that I believe. It says, "Make no mistake, the Declaration says that you have an endowed right to life, but citizens have no inalienable right to life. The Declaration says you have an endowed right to natural and personal liberty, but citizens have only civil and political liberty. The Declaration says you have an endowed right to absolutely own private property, upon which you can pursue happiness without permission of a superior. But citizens have no private property. Absolutely owned, a portion can be claimed by the government." And if you look at that, it is true. I mean, there's nothing, even down to our paychecks. We have to give part of our paycheck to the government. We don't have the freedom to be able to say that we want all of our money. And if you are being paid under the table by a business owner, well, not only can the business owner be in trouble, but you can also be in trouble by the IRS because you owe taxes. So no, we don't have freedom. In some aspects, yes, but I think it's a lot less than what it is that people make it seem.
Thank you for that, Brittany. While it is true that there are many other nations where speaking out against the government would be met with silence or death or worse, it's important to make these comparisons with a ginormous grain of salt. If you're taking a final exam and you get a D and the kid next to you gets an F, you did not do well on your final exam. In regards to the quote and what it had to say about freedom and its relation to private property, really harkens back to what Chris was saying earlier in the episode. The buffalo belong to the man overseeing the land. I can also appreciate what was said about the whole Monsanto thing in regards to knowledge being freedom. Having full transparency of something and knowing exactly what you're getting yourself into. For example, take law. An attorney will spend almost a decade in school learning the intricacies of law, the loopholes, the wording, and yet the average layman is expected to follow these laws. And how can you follow a law that is inherently made extremely difficult to understand? There's a lot of laws that are up to interpretation, either by a judge or by a law enforcement officer, which can sometimes create an inherent bias. Next, we'll hear from Ryan Price. He's an artist here in Orlando who I had the pleasure of meeting about a week or two ago and will be the highlight of our next episode. So here's Ryan.
Well, I think a natural world is in a way a free world because, like people, I mean, if you just reproduce and consume and make these choices, whether to harm someone, whether to love someone, whether to I mean, it's ultimately a choice, and you have control. You are the master. But people can also be easily easily impressionable. Like they can, and that's why marketing works. That's why advertising is successful. That's why people want to consume those goods and services. Not because, like, is it good or bad or anything like that. It's because they've been impressioned to make that choice. Oh, well, I like it, so I make the choice to do it. I don't like it, so I make the choice not to do it. It could be that simple, or it could be, I mean, whether you know that you are not safe, like an insect could make a decision to not climb up a wall because they see a spider, or they know that in their DNA somewhere, so they make that choice, but it's an adaptive choice. It's a natural choice. But some insects may not make the same choice. Like some people may make the choice to not wear a mask, or not wash their hands, not take better care of their health. We're all in some way guilty of one of those because we're like, well, I miss this, I miss that, I want to do this, I want to do that. So you'll risk it, but is that ultimately the best choice or the best choice for everybody else? And I think that the fact that you can you kind of shape your choices around how you feel it may affect your surroundings, and some people live without that. Some people don't think about that. So, consider it, and they make choices based on those. I think that there is a lot of personal freedom, and especially if you talk about the American mindset, that it is a very individualistic, it's not a collective mindset. So it seems that Americans are kind of like in the lead on thinking that way, in that, well, it's my body, I don't care if I get sick. The government can't tell me what to do with or without my body. And it's funny because the conservatives will say dumb shit like that, but no, a woman can't have an abortion. They can't make a choice about their body. The Lord has to step in, or the government has to step in on that one, which is just, it's sexist and unfair. If you're going to claim something, it should be a universal freedom to everybody. Like that's why freedom of religion exists. Like it exists, and I don't know why people have to have pissing contests and be disrespectful to other people because of their chosen religion. Again, it's a choice, but it is a choice that then influences your will. It influences your decision making. So ultimately, we are impressioned in some way. Oh, what will my mother think? So that kind of shapes your will. So we live based on our understanding of consequences. Some less, some more, some really more, really concerned with their consequences, and that's what persecution, hell, and things like that, I guess, kind of comes from. So there was someone, 2,000 years ago that felt that way so strongly that they imagined, fire and brimstone as a result of negative choices, or what they deem socially negative choices. And again, that is the other subjective thing, is that will, based on your culture, based on your upbringing, based on your friends, who you surround yourself with, who you let yourself be influenced by, what you read, all those things. And that's kind of what shapes the modern individual, is that, well, I have this stance, and that's a very uniquely, I feel, American thing too, is that I have these stances, and I stay, like, protesting. To go out and speak your mind is very inherently, it's part of the history of the entire country, of the bringing of the country, is to go and tear things down, to get rid of the old ways and create new ways. And that's what the youth of America and educated individuals in America are more lean towards. I for one am lean towards that. I think, like, this system doesn't work out. It doesn't sustain, and we need to change things. And that's part of our free will. Is the freedom to progress, is the freedom to enhance ourselves and better ourselves and help each other do that. Not just sit around and get bitter and say, well, that's not tradition, that's not, and tradition's bullshit, because tradition's just what your dad told you he thought was right. But that's not, at a point you have to be your own person. And that's where free will comes in. Is that you have to say, well, am I doing this because I'm worried that my friends will think I'm less cool because I'm not wearing Adidas shoes or something like that. And then it ultimately corners you into making a capital, like a consumer-based purchase, as opposed to just being yourself. Well, I like these weird fucking merengue shoes that my grandmother made for me. Rock those things. Like, what does it matter? Like, why does it matter? Be what you want to be. Be who you want to be. Be the change that you want to see in the world. Don't sit around and get bitter because the world is bad. Like, get up and try to do something about it. Try to influence people. Write something. Make something. Go out and talk about something with someone. And really express your ideas, and realize that you have in you the power of imagination. You can imagine a better world. And we'll all contribute to that world, collectively. So just, that's my take. It's a lot. It's a lot to think about. And there's a lot of ways you can approach it. And there's a lot of ways that you can recognize it in yourself. And it's just part of being and existing, I feel, is to question, to doubt, well, do we have free will? Do we, or assert that we do have free will, that we do have the ability to act and make things happen in the world.
Well, thank you, Ryan. There is a lot of good stuff to unpack there. I think I'll start with the idea of influence over our free will and over our decisions. Ryan mentioned marketing being successful for that very reason. Marketing firms use colors and shapes and imagery that influence our decision. Advertisements are inherently designed to change the course of our will, even if just a little bit. Then we also get into the familial and social reasons that freedom can be impeded on. We're not doing what we want because of the reactions of our family. We're not doing what we want because society wouldn't allow us to do it. And I'm not talking about big extreme things like showing your dick to someone in public. I'm talking about like speaking with certain people or staying silent when you want to tell someone how you feel, but maybe from a social standpoint, it would not be appropriate to do so. Ryan also inadvertently gets into some deep philosophical territory with the concept of individualism. Should individual freedom be held at a higher level of importance, even at the cost of the rights of the collective? It kind of brings back that litmus test where you're hypothetically given a button, and each time you push the button, you get $1 million, but someone that you don't know somewhere dies. Would you press it? Well, that pretty much wraps up this episode. Do you feel that you are free? Are the things that are keeping you from your ideal vision of freedom outside of your control? Are they systemic? Are they financial? Or are you perhaps not being totally free out of obligations or societal reasons? As usual, check me out on Instagram at Overheard Orlando Podcast, or you can always email me at overheardorlandopodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening. Stay true.